Record. So the first item on tonight's agenda is public hearing for proposed amendment to the town of Woodstock zoning regulations. Again, I'm going to reiterate what I said last time, and according to town's conflict of interest policy, I do not have a conflict of interest in this matter. I have no financial gain and am simply a chair of the select board. So to start things off, Mr. Steve Bauer is gonna start things off for us and give a bit of a presentation and rundown as to, yeah, so the time schedules, everyone's gonna have 2 minutes to talk, obviously, except for Mr. Bauer. We need to be wrapping things up by 6:15 because there's another meeting at 6:30.
Okay. Well, first, Joe, members, thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and, hey, Nikki, can you allow me to share the screen? Thank you. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. This is where we're at today. See, I'm for the record, I'm Stephen Bauer, interim zoning administrator for the town of Woodstock. So real quick, just some background on kind of how we got here. So the procedure behind this, back in November 2021, the zoning department had received a proposal from 5% or not less than 5% of Woodstock voters on amendment for the on-farm restaurant. The Planning Commission, under their statutory duties, reviewed that petition amendment and scheduled the first of 2 hearings in December. And then in January 2022, the PC held its first public meeting to discuss the petition amendment. February 22nd, they held the second meeting, which closed with then submitting the amendment along with its written support to the select board. And then the select board in April heard a public hearing, which I was here at, to consider the PC's report on the amendment. And at that time, the select board moved to revise the petition bylaw amendment at a later hearing, which is what gets us here. That's the fastest way to say that. Any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay. Okay, so we'll jump right into the language, and I'll do this as quick as possible. Board members, just stop me if you have any questions along the way. So you'll have this in packet like this, Ray, but you can also kind of follow along like this. That's kind of the more formal version of how it's written out, and this is kind of a little less formal. So the first section, Article 1, Section 10, these are the definitions, overall definitions as used. And so we actually define on-farm restaurant. So currently, accessory on-farm business is defined in our regulations. So we'd be adding on-farm restaurant. So as you can read there, an on-farm restaurant is a restaurant that is located on a farm which features a daily menu substantially comprised of agricultural products produced on that farm. So first thing to point out is that under these regulations, an on-farm restaurant is not an accessory on-farm business. So Act 143 is what allows that accessory on-farm business to happen. So something special about that is it provides the 50% rule that must be of agricultural products produced on that farm. So this eliminates that, but doesn't fully say just nothing is allowed on the farm. Instead, we give a little bit of discretion to the DRB to determine what that substantially comprised of agricultural products produced on that farm. But that big distinction is you can't apply to be an on-farm business, an accessory on-farm business, and an on-farm restaurant. Those two things are divided naturally. And then second, that it is not a retail establishment. We'll get to that a little bit later, where we actually prohibit retail on on-farm restaurants. And then restaurant just has the same meaning that it does in statute now. So like I was just saying, an OFR is not an AOFB. If you just need more acronyms in your life. And then this is the definition of what an accessory on-farm business is. I think we've talked about Act 143 before. We've continued to talk about it. I think we all probably have a pretty good idea of what that is and the limitations that it has with it and how it differs from an on-farm restaurant. But if not, I can go into further detail. And like I said, on-farm restaurant is not retail. So in the proposed amendment of section 536B6, on-site retail sales are prohibited. Okay, no questions there. We'll move on to Article 3, which is the.
Can we ask questions at this point?
Oh, I'd like him to get through. If you want to make a note,
That's fine.
In your-
That's what I thought.
I'd rather get through the whole thing in one smooth.
Okay, so,
So Article 3, this is the procedure of how you actually, what you need to do to get a permit. So for Article 3, Section 302 is amended to read, that's the residential 5-acre district. So that adds subsection E, which requires a conditional use and site plan review permit. So that's just simply the process that you go through. A little bit of background on conditional use approval for those that might need it. So essentially what that means is I, as a zoning administrator, cannot issue a permit unless the DRB approves it. So there's general standards. There's 5 general, that is a statutory requirement. That's the capacity of existing or planned community facilities, the character of the area affected, traffic on roads and highways, bylaw then in effect, and utilization of renewable energy resources. So the DRB has already gone through and knows how to kind of review these and the criteria. And then specific standards are specific things to Woodstock that the DRB has added, or the Planning Commission has added for the DRB to review. And that would be minimum lot size, distance from adjacent or nearby uses, minimum off-street parking, loading facilities, landscaping and fencing, and a few more. I'm sure all of you can read that. So essentially what that means is I can't, so the DRB reviews all of these with everything that needs a conditional use permit, and I can't do anything about it until the DRB reviews it and gives their approval. So just a little bit more on conditional use approval in general. The condition, so the TDRB is allowed to attach additional reasonable conditions and safeguards as it deems necessary. So what that means is that as we go through the actual requirements and standards that we'll talk about here in just a minute, if the DRB, even if there's a backstop, if the DRB on a case-by-case basis thinks that the limitations should be tighter because of going through the conditional use permit, they are allowed to do that. It just has to be, they have to be able to add those reasonable conditions. And then also, even after a permit is issued, they can impose conditions that actually kind of change the use of permit. Real quick, site plan approval. So essentially what this means is I cannot issue a permit until the DRB actually grants the site plan approval. So much like conditional use, it goes through these objectives in their review. And so also more discretion to the DRB, that they can limit the number and nature of access points, so that that's just roads, driveways, entrance, exits. They can require fencing, screening, and other things with the site plan, and require installation of surface drainage facilities to mitigate control of runoff. So that's all part of the site plan, and that's about as quick as I can do for the site plan. So that's a little bit of background for now going into the actual standards, which you can find in Article 5, Section 536. So we'll start with the statement of purpose. I'll just give everyone a second to read that.
Is that this focus, is that to be, or is that my eye?
Maybe turn off some lights.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. the channel is-
there's a- Dave, can you do that?
I also have an extra printed one if that helps. Oh, you have it.
So, well,
There's more printed ones here if anybody doesn't have one.
oh, okay, I see where we are.
Yeah,
Okay, I see, thank you.
It's the same language, just I was hoping this would be easier to read.
With the lights off, I can read it much clearer.
Okay. Anyways, anything with the amendment, it has to have a statement of purpose. So each district, we're actually adding a new use in this district, and so we have to have a statement of purpose. We have no comments or questions now. I'll keep moving on. Okay, so this 536B actually lists the requirements. So there's simply the things that you are allowed to do or not do. So we'll just start through the list. So first off, you have to submit a certificate of farm determination. So essentially what we're saying is that in order to be an on-farm restaurant, you have to actually be on a farm, and you have to be able to prove that before the application can go through the process. Hours of operation shall not exceed 11:30 a.m. to 10 p.m., 6 days per week. Minimum lot requirement of 10 acres. There is a 5-acre exception for the adaptive reuse of an existing farm structure. The restaurant building shall not exceed 2,800 square feet. There's some discussion on whether how to define that, of if that's the actual footprint of the building, the footprint of the dining area or service area. So we could probably better define that through discussion. Seating shall be limited to 60 seats. No more of those, no more than 15% of those 60 seats may be bar style seating. No customer shall be seated outside after 8 p.m. or inside after 9:30 p.m. The daily menu must feature products produced on site as determined by the DRB. So at the time of application, or right before the first hearing in front of the DRB would actually ask the applicant to provide a daily menu, which obviously will change over time, but kind of a basic idea. And then parking just conforms with the zoning regulations as we have them now. On-site retail sales are prohibited. Any questions there?
So the daily menu is once as an example, but not an ongoing requirement.
Yeah, so essentially what the DRB or after the permitting process, it would be the zoning administrator's job to kind of enforce that. And so the zoning administrator might set up something later on where we say, once a quarter, you have to produce a daily menu, or once every 6 months or once a year, to make sure that essentially they're staying within what the DRB has guided per the permit.
Okay.
Oh, and just as a reminder, so anything in this, like I was saying before, in the conditional use process, if for some reason the DRB goes through their conditional use review and finds that 2,800 square foot building may not work where the applicant is trying to put it, whether that be because there's other problems, it's close to a wetland, or it's on high slopes, so you still have to go through all these other reviews. You just simply because you have 5 or 10 acres doesn't mean that you automatically get to put in a restaurant. You still have to go through the other criteria, just as if you were building a house or building an industrial use or some other use that would be allowed with a conditional use. Okay, going to 536B7, these are special event requirements. So that would be celebratory functions, weddings, tastings. For indoor events, attendance would be limited to 80 guests. And obviously that's a backstop, assuming that they have enough space in a restaurant to host 80 guests. There's still a safety issue there. So if you don't have the capacity to actually host 80 guests, you don't automatically get 80 guests. Associated event parking for those events would be 250 feet from the nearest resident. For outdoor events, evening events shall be located at least 500 feet from the nearest residence. Limited to no more than 12 per year. Daytime events shall be located at least 250 feet from the nearest residence. Parking shall be at least 250 feet from the nearest residence. Evening events shall cease by 10 p.m. on weekends, that's Friday through Sunday, and 9 p.m. on weekdays, Monday through Thursday. No event may start before 8 a.m. and noise shall not exceed 70 decibels as measured from the property line. There shall be no firework displays, and attendance shall be limited to 100 guests. So if you're thinking maybe I just pulled those randomly out of the air, I did not. So in any sort of review and legislative action, when you're drafting a policy, I like to go with what has been done before. And so back in 2017, the integrated agriculture section was added. And then as well, the amendment in 2020 for rural retreats. That's the closest thing that we have in our regulations right now to kind of compare to. And so this kind of is a side-by-side comparison of those three. So, and I've highlighted in red. So if you see the first section is section 32, the middle is section 35, the rural retreat. And then on the right is the on-farm restaurant proposed amendment.
That's not one.
Let's see if I can also zoom in some. Is that slightly better? Should print out this page first.
Does that screen reflect one of the printed pages?
No, actually, this is actually pulled for a comparison of the three. Yes. Yep.
I mean, it's a public record, so you can give it to people if they want, yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So what this says, I've highlighted kind of the major difference in integrated agriculture and rural retreat. Outdoor event shall be located at least 1,000 feet from the nearest residence. The on-farm restaurant decreases that to 500 feet from the nearest residence. In both integrated and rural retreat, no more than 20 events per year. That is reduced to 20 outdoor events per year in on-farm restaurants.
12.
Huh?
12?
12.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did I say?
20.
Oh, sorry. 20, first 120, second 120, last 112. Yeah. Outdoor daytime events in integrated agriculture, at least 500 feet from nearest residents. Rural retreat, it's not specified, but assuming that I would just apply that at least 1,000 feet from the nearest residence. It's kind of difficult because whether or not there's a facility, I wouldn't necessarily include a tent as a facility. But that's not specified. Outdoor daytime events shall be located 250 feet from the nearest residence. Associated event parking located 250 feet from the nearest residence. In integrated agriculture, all outdoor evening events shall cease by 10 p.m. on weekends, 9 p.m. on weekdays. So rural retreat is, yep, the same, 9 p.m. on weekdays, 10 p.m. on weekends. And so yeah, so on-farm restaurant is pitching the exact same as the integrated agriculture, time-wise. So both integrated agriculture and rural retreats are copies. Noise impacts noise impacts at integrated agriculture shall not exceed 70 decibels, and rural retreat is 60 decibels. We put for on-farm restaurant, noise shall not exceed 70 decibels as measured at the property line. We also took out the additional conditions may be placed should noise complaints be received by the planning and zoning office, because that is already part of the process. So I feel like that's a redundant statement. But considering we have it in both integrated agriculture, rural retreat, maybe that's something that we want to include. There shall be no firework displays in any of these three. So integrated agriculture, transport to events shall be via shuttle. And that's specifically from the main inn. Rural retreat, transport to events shall be shuttle as much as possible from somewhere in downtown Woodstock. We did not put the shuttle service requirement in for the on-farm restaurant for kind of a more obvious reason, because the restaurant is actually the main part of the business rather than the special events. So in integrated agriculture, attendance is not expressly limited. I think that's for special, for special events. In rural retreats, there shall be no more than 50 persons present at one time. There is an exception for 5 events per year. That can be up to 150 people. And on-farm restaurants just propose just across the board, attendance limited at 100 guests. Again, assuming that you have the capacity for 100 guests. Okay, so just definitions that are used in section 536, the proposed section 536. A farm is the same as we talked about. I don't think it's best practice to probably change how the state has defined a farm and farm structure. So we just stayed there. And then the last is Article 8, Section 810. So this is actually conditional use. Most of this is just cleaning up the language because it didn't sound good to me. So anything that is struck through would be taken out. Anything that is underlined would be added. So for this first part, it just literally makes the sentence more readable. And then this part down here, the character of the area affected as defined by the purpose or purposes of the zoning district within the project it is located, and specifically states policies and standards in the Woodstock Town Hall. Okay, that is all I have.
All right.
Any questions for me?
I guess I'm curious why on some of the parking distances and everything, you chose the, I think the agriculture, the only integrated agriculture is Kelly Way, right?
Correct.
Rather than the rural retreat.
Yeah. Let's see, for
Think, parking from the nearest event parking.
yeah, so outdoor daytime events,
You know,
say when taking measurements from Kelly Way and kind of comparing just other potential integrated agriculture, but like 500 was a long distance. So I think we put that together just simply as a starting point for discussion.
Go ahead.
Can you use the word substantial reasoning for lack of specificity? The dictionary definition of substantial is of ample or considerable amount, quantity, size. Why go for the vagueness of that over exhibiting a 50% or greater
Yeah.
use? What is the rationale for that?
The rationale for that is because the 50% that we quote is already defined in Act 143. And so this is specifically to separate the requirements from Act 143, which are already set, into something different. And so that can be determined at the DRB's discretion.
that's placing that role in the hands of people who may or may not
Yeah,
have
the,
that wherewithal, that say the Department of Agriculture might or something like that. I mean, it just seems this arbitrary shift to an unspecified amount. That's all it seems odd.
yeah, so I think it's not meant to be arbitrary, it's meant to be different in the process for Act
Different every
143.
time then, if it, let's say, so one place.
No, they still, so when the DRB, they still go through the same process every time for their conditional use. And like I said, so when they review it, so what's great about substantially is that Black's Law actually defines it. So while it might, you can actually get to a point where everyone agrees what substantial is better than principally produced, until principally produced has a specific amount to it. So we're specifically did not want to trigger 50% or 40% or 30%, because the burden when you're trying to be an accessory on-farm business is different than the burden when you're trying to be a restaurant. So the statute actually allows towns to kind of have a more lenient policy. And that's what this is trying to be in how the restaurant would be measuring its the food produced from the farm.
Is the concept still intended to be farm to table? Is that, I didn't see that word in here. Is that an implication or did I miss the specification?
I
As a
I
term?
don't
mean,
have
I've
it.
heard that. I mean,
Yeah.
I've heard that Mr. Agro entrepreneurial guy from Hartland, this whole idea of farm, farm to fork as a driving component of this. And I'm surprised that somehow doesn't make it in as a concept.
Yeah, to my knowledge, I mean, I get the
I'm not
concept or
attacking you,
idea.
I'm just
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
I mean,
So I definitely, I have an idea of what farm to fork or farm to table means. But I don't necessarily have a definition of what that is. So I just stuck with what we have as hard definitions as we can.
and I guess on the last page, not to hog the question, so anyone please think about it. Number 2 on that, on page 8. Character of the area affected is defined by the purpose and purposes of the zoning district within which the project is located. And specifically stated policies and standards of the Woodstock Town Plan. I mean, that's. I mean, R5 exists. I mean, that is the specifically stated policies and standards of the Woodstock Town Plan. And I'm just finding this odd that we're deviating from in a rapid way what is understood by R5 at this point in time. Would you see where I don't know, I'm probably not asking the question, but it seems there's they don't align. I mean, on one sense, that's what the planning commission is trying to explain, is that there's a meaning to what the R5 is that has developed over decades of evolving the town plan. And now this is designed to saying it's going to abide, it doesn't want to conflict with the existing town plan, but then it then outlines a number of things that would conflict with the town plan. So I feel like it's discordant to me.
Yeah, so that criteria is actually, that's statutory. So I didn't really do anything to change that criteria.
Part of the word.
And I think that overall discussion is probably more for the board and potentially the planning commission than, so I just follow legally how it should be done.
No, I was just trying to make sure in case I missed something. I mean, so in that sense, that was.
Anyone else?
First off, I'd like to thank you for all your hard work, Steve and Joe and Dr. I know this is not easy thing to do. my team is very happy with the changes in this amendment and the revisions. Like you had noted, Steve, we did have one minor concern. It talks about yeah. It's, I don't know how to read this, but 20B, the restaurant building shall not exceed 2,800 square feet. And I know I had spoken to you both a little bit about this and how we could clarify that, because that could come off to people that they couldn't build a building larger than that. So, yeah, I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on possibly, I know we had talked a little on the phone, but, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And-
well,
and
I know there was a question, there's, it's between restaurant and agricultural use, so that
Yeah.
gets a little sticky. But if someone was to apply for this permit, I think we just, because it says building size, it could get really confusing.
Yeah, and that's something, again, that I would stress back to you all, that we probably work on some way to clarify what it is. We want that to really mean.
Is there a number of how many square feet a person needs in a restaurant?
Look like a dining room model.
There is probably, actually, that's probably, yeah.
There's three of them. There's five square feet per person, 7 and 15. It depends what you're doing and how the space is actually being used. So cars get a specific, dance gets another, tables and chairs get another.
Okay,
So
thank you.
that 2,800 square feet could just apply to those
People
restrictions.
usage.
Yeah.
And I think, though, you might have to think about the outside dining too, because you can't have a
Yeah,
huge, an outside dining area that's going to be significantly larger than.
Yeah, and-
Make the whole place significantly larger.
yeah, I think there's probably some sort of way, if we put our heads together, to figure out how to kind of determine what that footprint of kind of service area is. Because you have a lot of other things. I mean, you have storage and you have cold storage, you have obviously the whole kitchen. So you have a lot of things to put in there. And also another clarifying thing that I want to put out there is, so things that are just for storage for agricultural purpose, if it's an agricultural structure, we don't regulate that. We're prohibited from regulating that. So if it's some sort of building that has agriculture use attached to it, we can necessarily regulate
That portion.
that portion of the, so.
And
So-
when you-
So it
when you
makes-
say anti-retail, that means there's no selling of cheese or veggies or anything. There's no, right, there's no other commercial activity but the restaurant.
Correct.
So
So
why
to-
is that? Like, you
to-
know, you can't sell like a
Cause
cup
They
or
should
like
be
a. with
putting
your
their hand
logo
up.
on it,
Yeah.
but every other restaurant does, it's fine.
You sounded like you wanted to answer
No,
that.
I'm sorry, no.
because from my standpoint, the town plan says you can't do retail in an R5. We're making zoning changes that are consistent with the rural character, blah, blah, of an R5. So we have to keep that in there to still have that last section that Al was talking about and Steve was explaining. So I think that kind of has to be in there.
So going back to the restaurant buildings and all that, see, wouldn't it make sense to put something in there about depending on usage, like how many square feet, it's,
Yeah, and I think it could be as simple as something as saying, whatever the calculation that
Right, yeah.
Dave gave us and said, restaurant service area is, if it's 60, if it's the maximum of 60 seats, then it's that calculation of service area. You could split that into indoor service area versus outdoor service area. You could say the outdoor is only allowed to be 20% of whatever the indoor is. So there's different calculations, and I think there's probably a more simple way of thinking about it. And I think that's how we got to 2,800 square feet. Because I think we were all thinking something and just said, well, that seems like a pretty good sized building. And that's what we're trying to figure out now.
And if you look at, so that's B is 2,800, so C doesn't define if the seats are indoors or outdoors. I assume the reference is to indoor seating, but since Susan brought up that there's also,
Yeah.
you know, there is also outdoor seating, and I don't know if we need to specify that.
Just
Yeah,
for
David.
clarification, any place that has a liquor license or is a public building. So if your building is allowing 100 people, you can have 100 people outside, or you can have 50 people outside, 50 people inside. So you can't have 100 people outside and 100 people inside. Because the building has to be able to hold the people outside.
Yes. And I think we just, that's listed under events, right, where there's 100
Yep.
guests, but there's not a combined like guest to a normal seating. There's
Shall
seating,
be limited to 60 seats. So whether
Yes.
that's-
60 seats or 60,
So it's,
like 60 seats in chairs or like 60
I see
tables with
in-
I think 60 chairs.
60
yeah,
chairs, 60 chairs.
60
Okay.
people sitting in chairs.
I think,
That table.
I think so too.
The regulation doesn't guarantee that you'll be sold out every night.
Right. Gotcha.
And I'm sorry to jump around a little bit, but one of my other concerns is the outdoor events. Because, you know, our outdoor season is really short. And if you have 12 outdoor events, like 12 weddings.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And I note that the petition, people, you know, requesting the amendment, they only asked for 3 outdoor events with amplified music. So I would like to relook at how many outdoor events we're talking about.
What,
You guys have a question?
yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
60 seats. Did anybody do the math and figure out whether 60 seats is going to be viable for a restaurant? I know the restaurant next to me that we own, it allows 50 people. It's a pretty small space. So I'm just curious if anyone's done any math, whether this even makes sense from a financial standpoint for anyone trying to do it. Just curious, you know, we could come up with these things all the time, but if it doesn't make sense from a financial standpoint for a restaurant, then, you know, we need to be smart about that too. Otherwise, we're just, you know, creating something that no one can use. So just my 2 cents.
The petition was 80.
And I would encourage,
I have a question.
Joe, you might encourage.
Encourage what, 80?
No, encourage that if anyone has anything to say to that.
Yeah, if anyone has any comments on us
Because
to
I think that's
If-
part of this discussion is,
what, I know Cynthia, you got your hand up.
I'm just, a question, but if there's any room for takeout also, I mean, is that would be permitted, is that something that would happen? Anticipating the additional traffic and, you know, a lot of restaurants do it now. Wanted to know if that's something you should go into.
Can't hear that question. Can someone repeat it?
The question was as to if takeout specific and not a doggy bag with your meal, but takeout order is factored into this. I don't know what it was, but back to the other, we were. First issue is anyone that can talk to 60 seats versus 80 seats versus 50. I didn't realize is that Mount Creamery? I didn't realize they had 50 full seats.
Are you talking about the restaurant?
Yeah,
Sir? Yeah, we're licensed for 50 seats.
okay.
I don't know if anyone's been in there, but that'll give you a sense of what 50 seats.
I've been in there, but I didn't count it. I mean, I didn't count it. I just wouldn't have thought it was 50.
Yeah.
I would have thought it was.
I guess that's my point is, you know, 60 is not really that many when you think about it.
Okay. Thank you. DJ?
Thanks. My question, I think, was similar to Susan's, and maybe I just didn't get the answer out of it, that comparison chart and the distances between a residence and the actual event. I'm not following why this went down to 500 when the others had 1,000 feet, because the noise levels didn't change at property line. So it just seemed, I'm just thinking about impact to neighbors. Like when the distance is less, why did the town one go to a shorter distance?
So I can't answer in the sense of, so while they're doing a side-by-side comparison, because that's the closest that we have, but they're not perfectly equal side-by-side comparisons. For example, off the top of my head, Rural Retreat requires like 150 contiguous acres. And so we're condensing that significantly down to 10 acres. And so by all means, we want to encourage people to be far away and not close to the property line. And maybe that sort of, maybe 250 feet isn't far enough. And I think that's why we're meeting, discussing these things. But essentially the idea is we're condensing to, not only like half, but 5% of what some of these other districts require. So I think that's probably the way that it was shrunk.
Al?
Well, that gets me back to my original question about substantial. Even if you don't define it as a percent. And of course, the property could be larger than 10 acres, but let's say it takes it at its minimum. And you now have a proposed project on 10 acres. I can't imagine that there's any way a 10-acre farm could produce enough food to manifest off of 10 acres for a schedule as defined in this as well. I mean, to hit a substantial amount of food locally grown, in a restaurant based on as few as 10 acres.
Yes, and they may absolutely not be able to. And so if you're wanting to start a restaurant and you review, either you own a lot, or you're considering starting a restaurant, and you look to purchase a lot, and you do that calculation and decide.
And the DRB could deny on that. There's something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's even, the DRB could hear that beforehand and say, in an informal meeting, they could look at a site plan and say, this doesn't look good.
All right,
So unless you change
that,
the plan.
okay.
Okay.
I have to jump in here again. Has anyone talked to farmers and find out how much food can be produced in a 10-acre area? I'm finding this to be a little like loosey-goosey here. Has anyone done the research on all these different parts? Just curious. It just seems like we're picking numbers out of the air here. Just like 250 feet or 500 feet. I mean, to put that in perspective, 500 feet is a football field in 3/4 or 2/3. I feel like things are not put in perspective. They're just picking things. I don't know. That's what it seems like from what I'm hearing. So, if you're not sure about whether someone can produce enough food on a 10-acre lot, how about talk to a farmer? And in terms of 60 seats in a restaurant, how about talk to a restaurateur and find out where the break points are. If you're going to do this, make it so it's at least possible.
As far as the acreage, it's kind of a self-governing. If a person can't, with their restaurant and their restaurant plan, produce the food substantially and principally on the 10 acres, then they're not viable. If they have 100 acres, then they're viable.
No, I understand, but you're talking about 5 and 10 acres. So if we're talking about 5 and 10 acres, then we should
We
figure
got to
out
start somewhere.
whether it's possible. Is it possible?
I think,
That's all I'm asking.
It's just a starting point. I mean,
well, I think the 10 acres came from, because this is in 5-acre zoning, we felt, and probably a 5-acre farm would be able to sustain a restaurant, but we felt initially that a 5-acre farm was too small to have a restaurant. So that's why we did the 10-acre minimum, just to bump it because it is in the 5-acre zone. So it wasn't with the thought that anyone was going to sustain a restaurant on 10 acres.
But that's my question. You decided 5 acres, but did anyone talk to a farmer to say how much food can be produced in 5 acres? You know,
Well,
is
5
is
acres
it enough space for someone to substantially supply a restaurant? Has
Well,
anyone-
That's what the
Somebody
landowner
in the know.
figure out.
Right. I think that's kind of been answered, though. It would be up to the restaurateur and farmer to know if that's something viable for them or not.
But this is the town plan, correct?
No, this is a zoning rule.
Okay, but it's
They're
being
different.
added to the town plan, if my understanding.
Add
right?
it?
Is that-
No,
it's
it's
not like-
zoning. It's a zoning bylaw.
Okay, well,
Has to be within the, conform to the town plan. We're talking about an R5 acreage or R5 area. 5 acres is too small. We went with 10 as a starting point. In all likelihood, that's probably too small, but it's up to the farmer and restaurateur to know what they're growing, what their business plan would be before they go to the DRB.
okay, I understand that part.
Okay, thank you.
But again,
Mr. Stoner has a question.
Isn't it true that farms that are of scale that really could have a restaurant on them are located in R5 zones? And that's why we're talking about the R5 zones.
Yeah. Yeah, no one else is going, so.
I don't mean to argue.
Oh, Mary Margaret also has a,
Yep, I've had my hand up.
Wait,
So, yeah, so this is interesting. Thank you. I do still have specific concerns that this does not protect the rural character of residential areas strongly enough. Really what you're talking about is an exception, right? And so the predominant consideration should be for the rural residential area, as you're developing, that should be the predominant consideration. And I did send in specific suggestions, and hopefully you receive those. I'm happy
I
to.
I did eventually, for some reason, even though your email address looked correct, I never got it, but Ray sent it to me.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, but that would be my predominant consideration, and I really urge you to keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Carrie had her name.
And Carrie?
Oh.
No? Okay.
I was just before, I hope before any substantial decision gets made, which is greater than 50%, let's not that cheap. That I think the board should understand that, and I know this is technically not about Peaceville Farm, but this grew out of the frustrations around Peaceville Farm and so forth. So the Peacefield LLC, including the Hollands, the Meyerhoffs, Cynthia Vogt, myself, BJ, Dave Nixa, we have reached an agreement on the core dispute amongst us, i.e. a specific number of days of dining operations. So to some degree, to whatever degree, this effort is still in its DNA and its roots related to the debate and the issues surrounding Peaceville Farm. I think it's important for the select board to understand that is that we have signed. There are, and this isn't a completed step yet, but we have signed by Mr. Holland's lawyers a variety of other folks, the Meyerhoffs lawyer and so forth. So please do keep that in mind. If you're, because the last meeting I was here, we had some gentlemen moaning about, can the poor man get his restaurant started? That's not an issue anymore. Okay, that's off the table. Don't make decisions on that basis. I think you know what I'm talking about. But don't make decisions on that basis. Make them on what's best for the town, what makes sense, and not with a specific project in mind. You know, and that's the last thing I'll say.
Okay. Donna?
I just would like to say, I think that this is a very good thing for the town. I think it focuses a lot on the agricultural world and the farmers around, giving them another opportunity because, being a farmer is not easy right now to make a living. And so I think that this is very much about Woodstock and growing and evolving and supporting agriculture. And so I really appreciate what you guys have done thus far on your revision. And I think I just, thank you. And that.
So my kind of outstanding question that Patrick had brought up was kind of took me by surprise is comparing Mountain Creamery with 50 to the 60 that we've written. I don't know if anyone wants to discuss 60 as a where we should leave it, or if there's a change that should be made.
I think we have a lot of, I mean, I think we've given a lot of sections that maybe need
Yeah, but I still kind
re-examining, and
of,
so I think that could be one as well.
yeah,
Which in my experience, I see that as good news. I
Yeah.
don't think that we're starting at ground zero.
No.
I
Right.
think we've really worked hard to kind of shape this into a workable document. And I think it's good to know that it's still not perfect. And it may never be.
Yeah, I have a question about that. Like, so if you took out the 60 seating completely and changed the 2,800 square feet to just the dining area, what, like, can we figure out the math for that? How does that equal out to make it easier for the restaurant entrepreneur and farmer? Oh, I guess it's still a lot of talking to do, like,
Yeah.
what makes the most sense, so, but that's was just a thought that popped in my head. The 2,800 square feet limited to just the dining area, including the outside, 'cause that's also a dining area, would that equal out to be beneficial for the restaurateur to actually make a living? Mind, like, taking out this, it's
Well,
just a thought.
Dave, do you remember, you gave me those numbers 5, 7, 15. Do you remember which is for like a seated table?
5 is the least restrictive.
For,
People are gonna be aware of what's going on. They're not gonna be drunk, dancing. And that's the 15 end is that high end, the bars, the nightclubs.
okay, so we're talking 5 people per square.
Yeah, and then also go
Square.
by seating plan, because you have to have ADA aisles, you have to have aisles to your exits.
Right.
So it's really not that cut and dry.
Yeah.
And the one thing I wanted, Patrick says that it's 50, so that has a lot to do with state fire marshal law, state fire marshal law and Department of Health. So 50 and under is the least restrictive code. You don't have to do fire alarms, you don't have to do sprinklers, you only have one exit. You only need, I think, 2 bathrooms, typical boy and girl. And once you get over that 50, it escalates to sprinklers, fire alarms, more exits. So it's just want to know, 150 is usually the smaller restaurants.
I guess calculations have to be done, like what Patrick was saying, so
It's,
making sure that it's a viable business.
Well, I would hope whoever has a farm, before they jump into this, would do the math.
Like what?
I would hope anyone that has a farm before they jump into this would do the math.
Oh, absolutely, well, that's unfortunately not my expertise.
So if you had a 2,100 square foot, it was the entire layout of the building. But because it's on farm, any part of that building, if it was for storage of the farm equipment, would not be counted, so then you could add on to the building. I'm just trying to wrap my head around where this, because I know that we, like, it's simple for farming and farm equipment storage is not calculated. That much is simple. I'm just wondering if we're talking about that square, the footprint of the building, if we would exclude farm equipment storage.
We may want to just have a separate footprint of the dining areas.
Yeah,
rather
I think
than-
that's probably better. So I think in discussion, we got to the 2,800 square foot as a footprint of a building.
yeah, Okay.
More so because that's close to your average size of your farmhouse in the rural area.
And
That's,
that's a good consideration as well. You don't want to have a huge building.
Yeah.
yeah,
David.
and so part of you know, going.
Right.
David, you have something, David?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that quickly. So if you have a restaurant and the main building is 2,800 square feet and they have a milking parlor and cow barn on it that will hold 500 head of cows, not humans, the occupancy won't change. So they'll get maybe 1 or 2 employees for the main barn, and then their assembly space will be where only the people go. So you follow what I'm saying? So they may have a 20,000 square foot building, but they can only use 2,800 feet for the public. Unless they're like Billings Farm and, you know, does that thing.
How about the kitchen?
The kitchen, they typically count the employees 2 or 3. But then, you know, the milking cow, you know, it's cows. We care about the cows too. We don't want them, but we don't count it.
Just for point of comparison, I'm looking at Cloudland's listing on the agritourism site, and they say they see 50 guests in their dining room.
The 60 is a little bit above that anyway.
So our next steps are some revision and then another hearing, correct?
Yes, so essentially as quick as we can do the revisions and probably put some sort of calculation or something to this that makes it simple, but also clarifies it. And then as soon as we can get the final thing out, and we can warn for another hearing.
All right,
Quick question.
sure.
Tom Anderson, Spencer. At that second hearing, Steve, I mean, this is a better question for Chair Swanson. Can this final decision be made at the conclusion of that second hearing, or would there have to be a reconvene to make the final decision after a deliberative?
If there's no substantial changes made to the draft that we have that day, we can vote on it, as long as it's been properly warned, which is what, 15 days?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
That's what I was assuming. Thank you.
Yep.
So we're likely to have another hearing somewhere in July, second half, I mean.
At this, probably end of July, early August at this point, yeah.
Thank you.
A footnote on the big question about pickup food with, what's the term you used?
Takeout.
Takeout, thank you. Whatever.
No, I think they have
Takeout.
to.
Would
Yeah.
takeout be retail by definition? I mean,
I feel,
you drive it in and you get a bag that's all boxed. I just as you're doing your research, that's something I'd ask, is that reasonable?
I mean, it does kind of feel like it to me. I mean, I like takeout.
Yeah.
I eat in my privacy.
It's something that they would already be purchasing and sitting down. and
Right.
Taking it to go. Like, it's
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think the local farmer is gonna be upset if you say no takeout.
Yeah,
So, I mean, if you want to put it in there, say no takeout,
That's just.
I mean,
they have
But
to
it's-
what
have.
happens when we come into a situation like COVID, where takeouts like literally carrying businesses through that? Like, that's really not fair to take away from somebody, because sometimes you have to get creative in your ways of making money. I just feel.
Yeah,
like
'cause
there's-
take-
Things we can do. You
I
can do
mean-
like a percentage of the business.
Or
can't be
governor's-
takeout, you know,
governor's
something like
orders.
that.
Well, and again, they're gonna have to have extra help in the kitchen if they're gonna do a lot of takeout, and that's. They don't do a lot of takeout, they're paying people to watch somebody else work.
But that shouldn't be the problem with the
Right.
So
I
this-
just wanted to make the one feel that when you're reviewing things to, as Susan brought up, looking at those outdoor events, because 12 does seem excessive, and there seems to be no, I mean, they could have them successively too, presumably, there's no break or anything, so it has a potential, I think, to be very disruptive. There's a lot of outdoor events, so. And there's no mention of amplified music or anything like that. So I would ask, please, that we scrutinize with deny to protecting.
That would be the
Well,
decibel
the-
readings.
Yeah.
That'd be the decibel readings.
Right, but
But there's the number of
Right.
events.
Right.
You know, the
And,
number of events is one thing, but as far as the noise, that's
it'll be covered
regulated.
under the-
and that's what the 70 decibels is the go by. I don't think it's, I'm not sure if it's codified, but for the village, for the Woodstock Inn, when we're monitoring, we generally go by the 70 decibel as kind of like what we're looking at. To be under the 70.
Well, there is a difference in a quiet rural area, 70 decibels
Yeah.
there is different than 70 decibels in the village. 'Cause I hear nothing around my house.
Hmm.
And I can hear two people talking at John Holland's house, if they're, just standing around a barrel with a fire going in it. I can hear what they're saying. So it could be quite a bit. Just pointing that out.
Yep. And I think that's what the 70 is what the inn has at Kelly Way.
Correct.
Okay.
For integrated agriculture.
Yep.
Then rural retreat has 60, so.
Yep.
I wasn't here during the drafting of that, but I don't know.
I
how we-
wasn't either.
Yeah.
It was here,
decided.
just not on the board.
Yeah.
And anything from Mary Margaret? Anything else?
No, just on that, yeah, I mean, I would strongly advocate for a lower, a lower decibel level than is in the village. Obviously, it's a different setting, as someone said, but it's also, I think it's like it's a tenfold difference between 60 and 70. Someone would need to look at that, but it's significant. And again, the predominant consideration should be that it's rural and it's residential. And so what can you do to minimize the impact?
Okay. And Carrie, did you have any questions or anything to add?
No, I like many of Mary Margaret's suggestions, and I'm glad we get one more chance to workshop this, at least one more chance to workshop this.
All right.
And just to clarify
Yeah.
to the board, we will hold a minimum of one more hearing.
Yes.
If that does not
At
mean,
least one more chance.
yeah. I just figured it was good, Carrie, to go ahead and clarify.
Something for your notes, just as for your consideration. But in Massachusetts, noise regulations are based on ambient. So and it's 10 over ambient. So in the village, there's an ambient sound just by the nature of Route 4, et cetera. But in a quiet rural road, it's going to be 30, right? It's ambient. So explore that anyway, look that up. Use setting noise at a standard ambient sound of the area. Plus 10.
Okay. If there's,
I just have one question, sorry.
sure.
Do you need approval from anybody to do those events? Like, do you have to go through any type of permit to like have a wedding or something like that? Or is it already saying in the amendment that it's approved to at least do 12? Or if you say you have a wedding, do you have to go to the DRB at all or anything?
I don't know what the
Or
village,
do you have to
we
go
don't
with
have any in town, do
anybody
we?
to?
I think it would probably be written in the permit that you
Okay,
could
so
have
everything
X
would
amount of
be-
events and, they would have to end at a certain time and then.
Because some of the stuff you do have to go through the DRB, so I just wasn't sure if that was.
Yeah.
Also,
I know for the Woodstock Inn, we approved their permits specifically contingent on them alerting all the neighbors to the events prior to the events.
Yeah.
But that's not the case for everyone. So I think it's.
But is that do you mean that for Kelly Way or for the, because I don't think they do that for the wedding.
That's
do
for
they?
doing the inn's weddings, so that was a specific, but Kelly Way does not come before, as far
Right.
as I know, they don't apply for.
I
their
don't think for the town, I don't think we have that structure the way the village does. So I think it would just be, if you had the permit to do it, it would be in the permit to have the X amount.
Yeah. Yeah, because I assume that, so like for your assembly permits, it's probably it's well over 100. I assume.
I don't think we have one for the town.
Okay,
There's just,
Never mind.
just
Strike
within the
that.
village.
okay.
So I think it
Okay,
would have to
great.
just be part of
So-
the permit
so-
itself.
okay.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of asking questions while you're asking questions. Uh, So. So the way for the conditional use permit and site plan, they would also review, because there is a possibility that you couldn't be 250 or, whatever the. Maybe you're set up where your restaurant is or where you would want to have your events, that would be part of the conditional use. So just because this says that you could have 12 or 3 or 10 or whatever we end up at, doesn't necessarily mean that would still be part of the site plan and conditional use review. So if for some reason you had the 10 acres or more, but where you had to locate your restaurant couldn't be, in the kind of setbacks or from your other residents, there's a possibility that you couldn't you couldn't hold events because of that. So that's where it's like, and you try and it's broad, but it's still, at the end of the day, it's still a case by case review. And then there's just kind of this rule book. But it still depends.
Yeah, and it's still giving opportunities.
Can you post the chart you had? Can that get
On the
posted
town
somewhere?
website or
Yeah, so what I'll do is yeah. I'll send that over to either to Nikki or I'll post it on the planning and zoning website. I don't know. We'll figure out where to post it, but I'll post all those slides. Because I feel like those are easier to read than the way it's drafted.
So we can just agree they'll be available in 2 days.
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
So thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. If nothing else, we'll move on to the next item,
you.
which is additions to and deletions from. So I don't think there's any for that. Or is there?
We
Was
talked
that
about,
on the agenda? This was just the public hearing,
This is just well,
wasn't it?
right, but
it's also
there's still a quick.
Oh, was that?
Tuesday's meeting. Next Tuesday.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah.
Do we,
I'm just thinking that we're next Tuesdays after a holiday, we really don't need a Tuesday morning meeting next week.
I would agree.
I would agree.
Our last meeting was only a half hour.
Yeah. Carrie? You want to?
Agree.
All right, if there's a motion,
I'll make a motion to postpone next Tuesday, to cancel next Tuesday's meeting.
This is in response to the email you sent us a month or so. Sorry. Strike that.
we'll strike that from the minutes.
That's called my recorder.
Tuesday, July 5th.
Tuesday, July 5th,
Second.
second by Susan, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so the July 5th meeting will be canceled and we'll have our next regular schedule on July 19th.
Yeah.
All right. If there's nothing else tonight to come before the board, I'd call for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Ray, second by Susan, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We have another meeting after this?
We
Yeah.
do, we have a little delay and then it's at 6:30.
6:30.
All right, motion's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
It's probably executive session to review a contract.